Going to have a look at what's grabbing headlines here in France now. Lots of focus, in fact, on the opening of a new prevention centre aimed at fighting against Islamist radicalisation, isn't it, Fred?
That's right. This is the government's latest measure to fight against radical Islam and indoctrination. What they're being called is the Centers for Prevention and Reinsertion Through Citizenship. It's really a big story in the press today. They're being met, it must be said, with a certain amount of skepticism. You can see this is the front page of Le Figaro talking about the uncertain bet of this de-radicalization program. Now, the first center is opening in a town called Beaumont-en-Véron. That's in western France. It's set to welcome 30 individuals. Now, these centers are going to target individuals who are seen as being recoverable. They can be recovered, and it's being met by skepticism in the press, and it must be said a certain amount of fear in the communities where these kind of centers are going to open. But Le Figaro says there's a real need for these kind of centers, because if you look at the figures, nearly 12,000 people across the country have been identified for their apology of terrorism, for a certain hostility towards institutions, for a certain radicalization. That's a 70% jump since February.
So how on earth, Flo, is this centre supposed to work? Who are these, as you put it, recoverable individuals?
Well, you can read more about it inside Le Figaro. What's tricky is these individuals have never actually been sentenced for terrorist activity. They haven't fought abroad. They're not on the so-called Fichier S, the terror watch list that we've heard so much about. They've just been detected because of a change in their behavior, and they've been identified as being indoctrinated. Now, they're going to be aged between 18 and 31. Men and women will be mixed together, and they'll go through this 10-month training course, I guess you could say. It's an open course that will be with a team of educators. I guess you could say it's kind of like rehab, essentially. On the program, they'll have sports classes, but they'll also have classes on the history of religion. They'll have citizenship classes. For instance, they'll be taught how to salute the flag, for instance, and also classes on how to distinguish a conspiracy theory from reality. So it's a whole range of topics. And Le Figaro actually interviews one of these educators, the sociologist Gérard Bronner. You can see a photo of him here, who says, look, this is the first kind of center like this, not only in Europe, but in the world. And, you know, it's a trial. You don't get your hopes up too much. You can't be 100% sure that this experiment will work. But for now, there's no real golden solution to fight against radicalization. So we might as well try this one out.
Let's move on to something different now, something we were talking about yesterday, in fact. The government announcing it is creating some 9,000 housing spots across the country to relocate migrants, currently in Paris and also in that so-called jungle migrant camp up in Calais.
That's right. I was telling you about that yesterday. You can read more about it in La Croix today, that points out that the government says these housing spots will be available by the end of the year. So there's kind of a waiting period. But according to La Croix, that delay is actually necessary to prepare the towns and communities that are actually going to welcome these migrants and refugees. And you can see the front page here of La Croix with this question: are they really welcome? And you can see this. Was a photo taken at the airport, Roissy, actually, where you can see a Syrian refugee with his Syrian passport and a welcome booklet that they get when they go to these communities.
So some locals then really worried about this, voicing their concern, others rolling out the red carpet.
That's right. And La Croix wonders how to make more people want to roll out the red carpet, essentially. How can we tell people that it's a good idea to welcome these migrants? And in fact, they interview a man named Gérard Dubois, the mayor of a small village in the Auvergne region, and he talks about how it happened in his town when he opened a welcome center there. It led to outrage. In fact, his office received so many threats that his secretary was put under police protection for a while. He says that the initial town meetings were really stormy, but he really took the time to focus on the human stories behind these migrant stories. He talked about where they came from, what they'd been through, and he says that, you know, surely enough, things shifted. Things became more positive, even though, of course, there were always tensions, and those are things that he says that will always be there, but you do have to tell people the humanity behind these stories.
Bit of French politics now. Alain Juppé from the Republicans. This is Nicolas Sarkozy's main rival, really. He held a rally yesterday. He's been lashing out against divisive identity politics.
That's right. He tread on that very controversial turf of identity, religion, and immigration, the traditional stomping ground for the far-right National Front, and indeed for Nicolas Sarkozy. Now, he lashed out against what he calls divisive politics and says he wants to champion the idea of a happy identity, an identité heureuse. And so you can see here, Aujourd'hui en France, Le Parisien saying that Alain Juppé is trying to position himself as the prophet of happiness, I guess in opposition to Nicolas Sarkozy, the prophet of tragedy. Now, is he just falling into Sarkozy's trap, though? This is what papers are wanting to know. Because even though he's trying to put forward this positive vision, he's still making identity a focal point of his campaign, and that's Sarkozy's game. And if we take a look at a final article in L'Obs, they really agree with this. They say, whether it's happy or unhappy, the identity politics is taking up way too much space in the political debate. What about other big ideas like the economy? You can see here L'Obs saying that identity is driving the right crazy.
Flo, thank you. Flo with the papers on France 24. She'll have the international ones, of course, a little bit later on.